Does that make you feel good? Does that impress you?
Yeah.
Surprise you at all? Or?
Yeah, it makes me feel good to think that people probably are thinking positively, and just to see the memorial itself, it says a lot without anybody saying anything.
Did this whole process of internment, did it change your views on life, or did you come away from it unhappy or disgruntled or anti-American or anything, or did you look at it as just a facet of your life?
I say, try to love everybody. Be happy. Have joy in your heart.
These people were American citizens, and very few of them are still living today. But the story needs to be told, and needs to be retold and told once again after that. This must never happen again, ever. Citizens, all of us in America, have our rights, and these people saw their rights denied for a period of years because of the insecurity of racial backgrounds. This exclusion memorial is one of my favorite places. Not an easy story to tell, but one that needs to be told. This statue on the Bremerton waterfront is very nostalgic to me, and to hundreds of other people here in Kitsap County, I'm sure. It represents our mom or our dad or our brother or our cousin who worked in the Bremerton shipyard during World War II. In many ways, the Bremerton shipyard was the backbone of the Pacific Fleet. After the battle at Pearl Harbor, 6 of the 7 battleships that could be saved were towed here to Bremerton.
All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Republican media availability. We appreciate you joining us. With us today from the House Republican Caucus, we have House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury of the 31st District and Floor Leader April Connors from the 8th District. And from the Senate Republican Caucus, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun of the 20th District and Whip Keith Wagner from the 39th District. With that, I will turn it over to Representative Stokesbury for some opening remarks.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Happy, I think, week 13 of session. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Drew Stokesbury, House Republican Leader. We're down in the last 3 weeks of session. There's a lot of big things that are happening. Probably the biggest of all is the state's budget and some potentially massive tax increases that would just wreak havoc on the state's economy. We have seen proposals from the House and Senate Democrats that include a massive B&O tax increase aimed at the companies whose success has allowed Washington to become leaders in funding for things like higher education, K-12 education, healthcare. The B&O tax is targeted at the very companies whose success enabled us to be one of the nation's leader in all kinds of those categories. They have proposed a literal tax on jobs. This is the same caucus that proposed a tax on carbon in order to reduce the amount of carbon being emitted, now proposing to introduce a tax on jobs. Anybody who can't follow that economic theory, that's okay. You can just look at the experience Seattle has had, where they are getting way less revenue than they thought, and they are hemorrhaging jobs to places like Bellevue and other cities around the state. Because if you make the price of something more expensive, there will be less of it. So if we are going to add a tax on jobs, you will see less jobs in Washington and more jobs in Florida and Texas and Idaho and Nevada. They're also proposing a tax on innovation. They call it a intangibles tax, but it's an innovation tax that would make it so that the next generation of Boeing and Microsoft and Amazons would decide to not call Washington home because it just wouldn't be worth it. And on top of all this, vastly unserious taxing, the Democrats continue to march down the road of unserious policymaking as well. Yesterday, the rent control bill left Senate Ways and Means Committee. A bill to pay unemployment insurance for striking workers left the House Appropriations Committee. You cannot say that you're concerned about the economy, you're concerned about the price of housing when you are doing things like restricting the supply of housing and hanging a giant not welcome sign out for any business with union employees. But apparently not content with taxing the jobs out of Washington. As I've said before, Democrats want to also tax the joy out of Washington, and they have been continuing to do that this past week and already this week as well. In the House Appropriations Committee yesterday, House Democrats voted out a bill to tax short-term vacation rentals, a bill to tax those little Zinn pouches, and more on the docket for today. What's baffling about these joy taxes is they're simply not necessary. The budget that House Democrats passed, even if you assume all of the new spending items in their budget are necessary, it would only require a tax increase of about $5 billion, not $15 billion. And they could satisfy that with one of the giant economy-wrecking taxes they proposed. They don't also need to nickel and dime ordinary Washingtonians to balance their budget. They're just doing it because they want to. And that is pretty frustrating to have colleagues that apparently don't take the principle of do no harm very seriously, and that are so wanton and cavalier about raising prices and raising taxes for middle class and working Washingtonians, whether it's tax on Zinn or a tax on your own home. There are dozens of things that House and Senate Democrats continue to do that are making life more unaffordable for ordinary Washingtonians and are not targeted at the wealthiest individuals or the biggest businesses. They are targeted at regular people like us. And House Republicans are standing up for the little guy. We've got a little less than 20 days to try to make a difference, and that's what we're going to do. So with that, I will remind you all that, as John Handy said, our House Republican floor leader, April Connors from the Tri-Cities, the 8th Legislative District, is here to help with some questions. And then with that, I will hand it over to my Senate counterpart, John Braun.
Well, great. Thanks, Drew. And thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. As Drew said, week 13, we're coming down to the end, and it's certainly getting more exciting. So I'd like to start by just, highlighting some of the bad things that happened yesterday to the Senate Republican priorities and which reflect the priorities of our constituents around Washington. We have been focused on public safety, and the the Senate Democrats passed a clemency and pardons bill out of Ways and Means yesterday that would reduce the requirements for releasing folks earlier. On affordability, a really bad day. As was mentioned, they passed rent control, which is going to have the opposite effect of what they intend. It's going to ultimately increase prices and reduce access to housing across our state. They passed the low carbon fuel standard, which is projected to increase fuel prices by as much as 40 cents by 2030, something most Washingtonians just cannot afford. And finally, they passed the hydrocarbons bill that's going to drive up food prices and add additional cost to processing food and retail side of food. It's a bad bill that isn't well thought through. In fact, it requires a study to go along with implementation so they can understand actually how to implement it. It's a half-baked idea that's going to drive up the cost of food across our state. On K-12, another bad bill. The Senate Democrats passed out the bill that strips out big chunks of the parental rights initiative that was passed last year, and also adds very punitive policy to school districts and to administrators who don't toe the line with their social policies. It's a bad bill that's not aimed at improving education. It's aimed at enforcing their will on folks around the state of Washington, and it's wrong. On the budget, you saw us last week oppose going into conference because we knew what that would do is lead to absolute secrecy on the negotiation of the budget. And it's, despite the Democratic claims that it would be fully transparent, we're on day 6 and we know nothing about what negotiations are going on with the budget. I don't think the public knows any more than I'm quite sure actually the public knows no more than we do. It's the wrong way to do things, particularly in a year like this where we have a substantial deficit. We have these outrageous proposals for taxes that Drew described very well. And we have the governor drawing a line in the sand and saying, I won't sign this stuff. So we know there are going to be significant changes from what has been heard and discussed in public, all done behind closed doors by the 2 Democratic majorities. Last thing I'll say is they are still marching towards an enormous property tax increase. Here in the Senate, it would go from 1%. They're proposing no cap, with only limitation being inflation and population growth, which means on average 4.5% is a cap, but could be as high as 10% based on recent inflation numbers, something that our homeowners simply cannot afford. So I think we got a lot of things going on, many of them going in the wrong direction in my view, and I look forward to your questions. I have with me today Senator Keith Wagoner, who is the Republican whip here in the Senate. Open to your questions.
All right, with that, we will go to Jerry Cornfield.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my question. Actually, I want to direct this to Senator Wagner and Representative Connors. The conversation about tariffs, it's become national, and I'm wondering, you folks represent ag rural districts and have ag in your communities. What are you hearing about the immediate and feared impact of the tariffs in your communities?
Well, thanks for the question, Jerry. And so what I'm hearing, to answer that part of the question, is across the board. People who are very concerned, people who aren't concerned. If you want to know how I feel about it, I think that there's going to be some short-term pain for long-term gain. And I think it's very hard to argue with the idea of reciprocity. So reciprocity is simply the golden rule in reverse. I think that we should expect that from our trade partners. So yeah, I think there's concern out there. I don't claim to be an economic genius in any way, shape, or form, but I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to give this a wait and see, and hopefully it will land on the right place.
Morning, Jerry. Agree with Senator Wagner that it's a wait and see attitude in the ag world. If you didn't know, our family are farmers. We are potato, onion, apple, and many other rotational crops. That's what we do for a living. We also trade with other countries, Canada being one of those that we trade with. And while there is some concern, I think on both ends for the ag industry, if you think about potato industry in particular, there's a lot of potato products that come in, especially frozen fruit products that come in from other countries. That might be an opportunity for our area in Washington State to actually start making more of those products. And so I think it's going to be a wait and see attitude. I think for a lot of our farmers that are doing exports, it's definitely a little more difficult right now. And again, like Senator Wagner said, it's going to be kind of a wait and see, and how it's going to affect completely the ag industry right now.
Jerry, do you have a follow-up?
No, I'm okay. Thanks.
All right. Next, we will go to Simone Carter.
Hi, good morning. So I was wondering if you all had an opportunity to look at OFM's concerns letter regarding the House and Senate operating budgets and how you think it would help inform budget negotiations moving forward. How did the letter strike you? If you could provide your response, please.
So I have read the letter. I think that letter is important. I think that letter and historically previous versions of that letter deal largely with technical concerns, implementing things that are suggested in the budget. There are some pushback on specific items that don't seem reasonable. I don't think it gets after the big issues, but I think the governor did pretty clearly in his press conference last week. He set out very clear priorities for what he expects to get in terms of in what kind of a budget and supporting bills he would sign. That is, I think, by far more important to say, look, this is entirely too much taxes. Unfortunately, he didn't close the door entirely on taxes. We know we could do this without taxes. We know certainly there's some uncertainty in our future, financial uncertainty in our future. We'd be wise to do it without taxes, make sure we husband our resources and prepare ourselves whatever ups and downs we might have over the coming year or years. But I think his guidance that not to use the rainy day fund, not to assume higher revenue than expected, not to rely on taxes to fix the problem. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that the budget proposed by Senate Republicans now, I think 4 weeks ago, I know it does all these things. So whether, now I don't expect the Democrats to embrace that budget, but it certainly offers a good starting point if they're going to try and present a budget and related bills to the governor that he will sign and get us done here in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'll agree with Senator Brown. I mean, I think the letter is mostly things that are more technical in nature. It's a routine letter. OFM sends it to legislators every year after the House and Senate budget is passed. I actually hope that this year the budget writers spend a little bit more time talking with the governor than they have in the past, and more time talking with the governor that we have this year than the one that we've had for the last 12 years. Because we finally have a governor that is engaged and cares and has some good ideas. They're not all good ideas, but he has some worthy ideas. And it would, I think, behoove the House and Senate Democratic leadership and the people we all purport to represent by having more communication. And if they do open those lines of communications better, they will understand that the governor is very serious, that he has said plainly that he will veto a wealth tax and that he expects the legislature to pass a budget that doesn't rely on a wealth tax. The governor was elected by a majority of Washingtonians. House and Senate leadership were only elected by couple tens of thousands of people in their own far left districts, and then their own caucuses. So the governor probably represents a better swath of Washington than Senator Peterson or Speaker Jenkins does. And I hope they listen to the governor when he says he does not want to assume more revenue than the economist tells us we're going to take in. He does not want to spend money out of the rainy day fund, and he does not want to make Washington State home to a wealth tax that will kill innovation and kill all future budget growth. So yes, OFM sent a letter with some technical suggestions, but I hope that budget writers are listening to more than just the technical suggestions, that they are listening to what Governor Ferguson is saying, because in this case, he is right and they are wrong.
Yeah, if I could just add that I think the governor is actually providing the majority an opportunity here to self-reflect and correct themselves. Now, I don't like the fact that they may take this self-reflection behind closed door in an opaque way that we don't have a chance to weigh in or the public doesn't get to see it. But it's an opportunity for them to take some of the suggestions, maybe not everything, out of our budget. And that was the reason it was released ahead of their budget, so they could use it as a tool to make their budget better. I hope they take that opportunity that I feel like the governor has given them right now.
All right, Simone, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick one. If memory serves, the governor was going to meet with GOP leadership following last week's press conference. If my memory is correct, how did that meeting go?
We did meet with, actually right after the press conference, just as the schedule worked out. I don't think it was planned that way well, and the governor has done a good job of meeting with us regularly during the session, about every 2 weeks. I very much appreciate that. There's many things we don't agree on, but there are things that we do agree on, and in that meeting we mostly discussed, as you would expect, his comments from the press conference, and then we also talked about some bills that we have concerns about. I'm not going to go into the detail of what we talked about, but it's been a good conversation where I feel like the governor has earnestly listened. Even if he didn't agree, I think he's been willing to listen to our points of view, and I'm hopeful that that will influence how he addresses any bills that come before him for signature.
Yep, I agree with Senator Braun's characterization. It was a good, pleasant meeting. Appreciate his willingness to engage with folks on the other side of the aisle and to have rational conversations based in this reality, not some alternative reality. And that's a refreshing change. So we pointed out a couple areas where we thought we could find some agreement, flagged a couple issues that we think are some problematic bills and issue areas that are still in the mix, and try to explain to him why we think they'd be a bad direction for Washington State. And he was receptive. He listened, but he can speak for himself too. And he did speak very loud and very clearly right before he met with us when he said that he would veto the wealth tax. And he has some, he called them bottom lines, red line, non-negotiables, pick whatever phrase you want in the budget. And I sure hope that House and Senate Democrats don't think that they are going to try to roll the governor, or don't think that they want to try to call his bluff, because that will send us into special session for no reason whatsoever, because the governor has been very clear about the kind of budget he wants to see, and it's a very, very easy solution to provide. The question is whether House and Senate Democrat leadership are going to work with the Democratic governor who has been elected by the entire state, or if they're going to cater to the far left flank of their internal caucus.
All right, next we'll go to Laurel Demkovich.
Hi, good morning. This question is for Senator Braun and possibly Senator Wagner too, if you wanted to weigh in. During the debate in Ways and Means yesterday on the rent cap bill, there was a striker from Senator Cleveland, and Senator Braun, you had said that you think the committee should move that version. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what in that version is better than the current bill, and had that one made it to the floor, would you have voted for it?
Yeah, so the main difference that it's along many parts to that bill and many parts to the striker, but the key, most important difference was it went away from price controls. It didn't have a limit on the price increase for rent. It simply said if you're going to increase by any amount, you have to notify the renter, and if you're going to increase by over a certain amount, then you have to give, I believe, 90 days notice to the renter. So it goes from a rent control to a notification bill. That makes all the difference in the world when it comes to investment in Washington State. People, I'm not sure everybody fully understands, but the threat here from rent control is that we don't have long-term investment in building housing in our state. And if that happens, we'll have less housing, and that will ultimately drive up costs. This will work exactly opposite as the proponents want it to work. So this bill would simply say, we're not going to limit things, which means we don't put unnecessary restrictions on capital markets and unnecessary restrictions on investment in Washington, and we have more building here in Washington. Simple as that. As far as whether I would vote for it, frankly, I'm undecided. I don't think the bill is necessary either way, but as a alternative to rent control, to a true rent control bill, yes, I'd be very interested in supporting that bill.
Yeah, I would say her striker is something that you could vote for, that I could vote for. I absolutely can't vote for what's going forward right now. It is going to kill all the small operators in the state. They're just going to have the difficult decision to make is who they're going to sell to, who you're going to sell your mom and pop business to. It's going to be somebody big and powerful who can absorb the costs and the management of rentals under the new rules. So as I said in Ways and Means last night, if that's what you want, if you want to see all the mom and pops kicked out and only the big guys survive, and maybe they won't survive so much, then push this bill forward. I'm reminded that Joe Wen, who came and talked before Ways and Means several months ago now, he kind of got it right. He said developers have to have certainty, and they're operating on the edge right now. If we make it harder, the edge goes away and they're off the cliff and they're not going to invest here.
I'll add one other thing with regard to that bill. That bill, as it left Ways and Means yesterday, is the worst rent control bill on the West Coast, meaning it's worse than Oregon's, it's worse than California's. So even if we have a developer who's intent on investing in the West Coast, they're not going to choose Washington as it stands right now. And that's a bad thing for everybody, especially for renters.
Did you have a follow-up, Laurel?
I guess just quickly on that last point, can you elaborate on what you mean by worst? I'm not familiar with all of the details in the Oregon and California bills.
So there's a lot of details in there. I'm not sure I could go through all of them from memory, but the one that's probably the most important is the cap. That bill has a 7% cap where and no acknowledgement of inflation, CPI, whereas both in Oregon and California include CPI inflation in their cap, so that when you have significant increases to the cost of managing an organization or a rental, that can be passed on. Because if you can't pass it on, they simply go out of business. Senator Wagner is exactly right. There are real costs to managing rental housing, and if you can't recoup those costs in some fashion, you simply can't be in business. You can't provide that housing. It's as simple as that. And both California and Oregon are better than this bill in that regard.
I just want to weigh in a little bit too. I believe that California has a more of a local jurisdiction implementation of rent control than Washington State would be a statewide jurisdiction on rent control over the entire state. The bill did change, as Senator Braun and I talked earlier, and is allowing developers to be exempt from the bill for 15 years, which is better than the 10 years that it came out of the House with. But I do still think with a 15-year exemption on rent control that is going to still be very bad for development in Washington State. We heard from a lot of developers who are already investing in Idaho, Arizona, Montana, and different states that do not have these restrictions. It's already expensive to build in Washington State with all of the requirements by our State Building Code Council, our permitting cost, everything else, that we're going to continue to drive developers out. And there's no way we're going to reach Governor Ferguson's goal of getting 200,000 units in his first term in Washington.
All right, next we'll go to Jeannie Lindsay.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for taking my question. Senator Braun, I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned earlier just about the budget conversations. I know that budget conversations in this phase of the process typically happen behind closed doors before there's an agreement that is made public later on, close to the final days of session. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about your thoughts about the process generally and how it should change in order to enhance transparency for the public, especially as you mentioned this year when there are a lot of pretty big changes that are being floated by the majority party. So, Senator Braun, I wanted to direct this question at you, but others obviously can weigh in.
Yeah, sure. Great question. As I think it's one that not folks don't automatically understand. And since the Democrats gained the majority in both chambers, they have, I think, almost every case used the conference process, which I don't think that's a good idea in that case. But in most up until this year, they've been relatively close together. If there was revenue, it was a fairly well-defined set, and it was much, much smaller than what's being proposed this year. And of course, you didn't have the governor weighing in and saying, no, you can't do these items, or I won't sign, or I'll veto rather, these items if you do them. So we have a much different scenario this year than previous years. We have budgets that are fairly different. We have some significant difference in revenue. We have some statements from the governor that says, I won't accept either of these budgets at their current spending level. They're way too high. So we have a real possibility of changes happening in that secret negotiation that nobody's even thought about. There's been no public hearing for. I would suggest, and this is what we did, I think for all 5 years when we had the majority in the Senate, is we didn't go to conference. We passed bills back and forth, and yes, there was, and yes, press still didn't like it. There was some private negotiations. It's hard to get by without that. But we would periodically pass a budget back and forth and give the public and give the media a chance to see the progress that was being made. Right now, we have none of that. There's no way that they're, at least so far, they're not signaling at all. We have decided on X or we've decided against X. We're just left to guess probably for the next 2 weeks until they roll it out. And then the last thing with a conference procedure, which didn't exist as we did it back in the old days, as they say, is there's no amendments allowed. Once they come up and they vote it out of conference, it goes up for a yes or no vote in front of the two caucuses, and there's enormous pressure on the majority caucus to just approve whatever the budget writers came up with. So it's not just Republicans that don't know what's going on. I would submit to you that most of the Democratic caucus doesn't know what's going on right now. And certainly the public doesn't know what's going on. There's absolutely a better way. You just pass a budget back and forth at certain milestones to signal, hey, we've made some progress on these items, and then and put it in the lap of the other chamber to work on. Much better way in this situation.
Did you have a follow-up, Jeannie?
Not right now, but thank you.
All right. Next, we go to John Stang.
Just one question. With the national tariffs coming out, has your side done any pondering on what the Trump tariffs would do to the state's revenues over the next biennium?
Well, certainly, like I would suggest maybe every citizen in our country, we've all, I'm sure, thought about it some. It's hard to ignore. It's been the top of the news. the reality is here in Olympia, one, they don't call us to ask us about tariffs, and two, we can't, we have no control over it. What we can do is plan for what we know, and what we think will happen. And I don't think any serious person is going to say they know what will happen with tariffs. I think, as was mentioned earlier by Senator Wagner and Representative Connors, I think it's still an unknown. I think, if you look back, that we've had this this effort on tariffs since the first Trump administration, kept in place throughout the Biden administration. By and large, those did not have the impact that many people thought they would. This is certainly a different and broader approach, but literally things are changing every day, sometimes more than once a day. So I don't think we're either in a position to have an impact. Certainly they're not asking us, and nobody knows the outcome. So for me, what I focus on are things I can control. And people are pretty worried about tariffs, but tariffs a tax. I'm much more worried about the taxes that the Democratic majorities want to put in place in our state and the damage that will do to our economy, regardless of what happens with tariffs.
Yeah, I will echo that. I welcome any Democrat who suddenly cares about the economy of Washington to the conversation. I will wonder where they've been for the last decade as they've passed policy after policy that makes Washington a harder place to do business. But yeah, we should all be concerned about Washington's economy and our ability to have companies grow and thrive here that hire great people that can live, work, and raise a family in this great state. And I support policies that are conducive to that, and I oppose policies that make that harder to achieve. But I ran for state office because my constituents wanted me to help with state issues. And I don't have any more of a say on national issues than any of the 150,000 constituents I represent. But when it does come to state issues, we can make a difference. So yes, if folks are concerned about the impact that taxes will have to the state's economy, then let's take the tax on innovation off the board. Let's take the tax on jobs off the board. Let's dramatically reduce spending so that we don't have this pressure to tax our way out of problems that will make it harder for Washington's economy to succeed in the medium and long term. Let's take policies like unemployment insurance for striking workers and rent control and environmental crimes off the table so that we stop hanging up this giant no vacancy, help not wanted sign on the roads into Washington, and instead we do what successful states like Texas and Florida are doing and say, we actually want companies to come here and we want them to hire Washingtonians, and we're going to adopt policies to encourage it. Yes, John, I am nervous about the direction of the economy from a national standpoint, but like Senator Braun said, I don't have a vote in that regard. I do have a vote on policies that will affect the direction of the state's economy that involve state laws, and I am urging my colleagues across the aisle to recognize if they are going to do more harm than what they are purporting to be concerned about in the first place.
I just chime in that I think we were all happy to hear the governor say that he was didn't want to sign a budget that was going to touch our budget stabilization account, our rainy day fund. That will be very important if we do end up having problems with our state budget in the future. So I think we were all happy to hear him say that as well.
All right, next we'll go to Carlene Johnson.
Oops. Thank you. I appreciate the chance to ask a couple of quick questions. First of all, we talked quite a bit already about the tariffs, but I want to ask specifically having to do with the volatility of the capital gains tax, given what the tariffs have done already to the stock market. And there has been talk of potentially raising the capital gains tax. Do any of you have concerns that, that might further that conversation given what's happening with the stock market right now?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the chief critiques that House and Senate Republicans had when the capital gains tax was first enacted, that it is wildly volatile and it is not wise to have so much of your budget based on such a volatile revenue source. And not only is it volatile, but it is highly correlated with the economy and stock market overall. So, which means that when times are good and you don't need a lot of budget help, well, great, you're collecting a lot of capital gains. But when times are bad and your budget is becoming hard to balance, that is when capital gains tax collections are at their nadir. So it takes a bad situation and makes it worse, which was something that Republicans said at the beginning. And yes, I suspect if the national politics disrupt the stock market for more than a couple days, if this becomes an ongoing thing, then I am sure that the next revenue forecast will significantly downgrade expected revenue collections from the capital gains tax.
Yeah, the capital gains tax, I mean, it's a tax on investment, it's a tax on innovation, both things that have served Washington's economy well. The notion that they're going to raise the rate is just going to drive those things away from Washington. You've already seen we've already seen the revenue from, in addition to just the innate volatility, we've already seen the revenue from capital gains go dramatically down because people adjust their behaviors. The people who would pay these tax have other options for investment outside of Washington State, have other options for living outside of Washington State. Think Jeff Bezos, and they're going to take those, and we're not going to see the revenue, and we're going to destroy Washington's economy.
Did you have a follow-up, Carlene?
I do. Kind of unrelated question, but I was watching that. That Senate Ways and Means Committee hearing Monday afternoon into the evening, and just watching, Republican members attempting, offering amendment after amendment, only to be, I urge a no by the committee chair, of course. Is there a way to characterize just how bad from your perspective this session is? I mean, just in that hearing, whether it's, parents' rights being amended, the permit to purchase, the race-based housing program, rent control, all of it, thing after thing after thing that just gets pushed through. It seems like it's really bad this year from your perspective, I would guess. Can you characterize it given previous sessions, or is this bill just really the worst of the worst?
Yeah, I don't have any, pithy comparison but I would just kind of look at last night's hearing. We had 26 bills that were exec'd out. I think 16 of them had all the, when they came out of the House, had all the Republicans that no, and even some of the Democrats that no. So these were very divisive bills. Of the remaining 10, half of them were small bills that were bipartisan, and the other half were still very significant no votes on there. So these are, the majorities like to say, a lot of what we do around here is bipartisan, and that has been true in the past. That does not seem to be true this year nearly so much, and certainly not last night. There were a lot of bad bills that passed out of Ways and Means last night. Very discouraging for me, but more importantly, it should be pretty discouraging for the people of the state of Washington who see themselves getting run over by bad policy from the Democratic majorities.
And Carlene, I'll just add in appropriations last night. It was very similar. We had 22 bills. I think 21. One was pulled off the list last night that were exec'd out. One of them was the striking workers bill, which we had quite a few amendments on that one as well. We did have a couple of amendments that were close with a one vote margin on those. One of them was moving it from 12 weeks of unpaid leave to 4 weeks of unpaid leave for striking workers, and but very discouraging. We had also a host of amendments on the short-term rental tax last night, and none of those were taken either. And so it can be very discouraging when you're offering amendments that that are going to be helpful to the state, helpful to the bill, but the majority party is not willing to look at those amendments. So unfortunately, it was about as poor of a night in appropriations as it was in Ways and Means last night as well.
Yeah, when almost every single Republican amendment is just summarily dismissed, some with no argument at all for the reason, it makes it less satisfying to work with people when you feel like they're not listening to you at all. And I'll give you one example of an amendment that's just on its face perfectly fair. In the rent control bill, if you're the tenant and you sue, you can recover legal fees. If you're the landlord and there's a lawsuit and you win, you can't. I mean, that's just on its face is completely unfair. And it's just one example of the things that are just have been summarily denied because it's our idea. It's demoralizing, especially when you have to go back and work with the people again and assume that we're all working in good faith. I hope that that's true, but a night like last night does drag, at least on me, drags on my psyche and sometimes makes me wonder what I'm doing down here.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. We'll go to Jacob Moore.
Hi there. Yeah, my question is primarily for Senator Braun, but could also apply to a number of the legislators here. My question is basically, what are your biggest concerns with how the proposed property tax changes will affect constituents in more rural communities like yours in the 20th District around Centralia, Chehalis, and even in East County, Lewis County?
That's a great question, Jacob. So, I mean, some of them, the concerns for my district are the same concerns as around the state. This is a regressive tax that is a bigger impact to folks who are middle income or living close to poverty or in poverty than it is for wealthier. It's just hard on people, and it's harder on rural communities where an increase can mean because we have lower assessed value than some other places in the state, we tend to have higher levies, whether it's for schools or fire districts or library districts. The levy rate, the dollars per thousand, tend to be more in rural areas than they do in high assessed value urban areas. And that means relative to their assessed value, they're just going to be paying more money that they frankly can't afford. So this is a big deal. And then stack on top of that the fact that we have this housing crisis that we're going through, which has made both purchasing a house or renting very expensive. And that's not just true in urban areas. It's very true in rural areas where I live. Housing prices have gone up significantly. Rents over the last 5 years have gone up significantly. I will add, in some places in Lewis County where there's been some significant building, because of that building, I've seen some evidence that rents have stabilized, which is a good thing and a good example of why the solution to housing is supply, not restrictions like rent control. But back to your question for property tax, it's just a housing cost people, particularly in rural areas, just cannot afford. And we're going to make it, eventually, we're going to make it impossible for them to stay here in our great state.
Yeah, I will echo that. I mean, it's frustrating to watch the rhetoric from the other side say that their revenue proposals are about rebalancing our tax code and making wealthy Washingtonians pay their fair share. And again, like I said at the beginning, I think it's a little foolish to target the companies whose success has enabled our state to have such great levels of K-12 funding and higher ed funding and healthcare funding. But you do you, I guess. But that's but even if that's true, even if it is a good thing too, taxing oblivion or tax these big companies that have had success out of oblivion. It's not. But even if it were, that's not all their tax policies are doing. They're also targeting regular middle class working families. In a session where we say that we want to reduce the price of housing, to have a double whammy of a giant new tax on people who currently own homes and a giant new squeezing of builders who want to build new homes and create more supply, that is going to devastate the state's housing market and make housing even more unaffordable and unattainable for people, which is the opposite of what our goal should be. So both frustrating from a macro level that the execution does not line up with the rhetoric, but also frustrating on the micro level that the policies that are being pursued would be extremely detrimental to this stated goals.
And just to jump on what Rep. Stokesbury said about people who currently own homes, if we care about keeping people in their homes and home ownership, this is the worst way to go about it. This is a way to force people out of their homes and make more people homeless at a time when we say we're trying to work for the opposite outcome.
All right, with that, we will go to closing remarks, and I'll send it to you, Representative Stokesbury.
Yeah, well, I don't have a whole lot else to add. Thanks everybody again for joining us, and I'll just circle back to how I started, which is we've got 20 days left and a large budget situation to solve, and there are a litany of taxes on the table. The taxes on big businesses and wealthy Washingtonians would devastate the state's economy, and the taxes targeted at regular people would devastate the pocketbooks of regular Washingtonians. The solution is to do a better job on the spending side so that there isn't a need to raise taxes by a massive amount. Governor Ferguson outlined some non-negotiables, some bottom lines of his that would put the state on some more sensible footing and would be eminently easy to do. And I hope that House and Senate budget writers are listening to the governor and are willing to work with him and don't think it would be a good idea to try to challenge him in a game of chicken that will put a lot of jobs at risk and send us in a special session. This isn't a hard problem to solve. We can do it, and we can do it in a way that that doesn't raise taxes on regular Washingtonians and do it in a way that doesn't devastate the state's economy. So I hope we can figure that out in the next 20 days.
And I'll just add, thank you very much for taking the time. We're out of time today, but I appreciate you taking time to call in or dial in, ask your questions, and the work you do keeping our public informed. Have a great day.